And how are they described? The behaviors of the youth, really, right? What's reported when it comes to the youth educational engagement. I'd really like to hear what you think or what you see, right? How our youth are being portrayed, what language is being used. So I'd like to kind of pass it on and kind of hear your thoughts on that.
I'll just say one that I hear a lot: antisocial. Is that what you're looking for?
Yep, you're right on it. You hit the nail on the head.
Coddled.
Coddle? Mm-hmm.
Although that may be more the parents' fault.
I think these are all good, actually.
I think that goes along with saying that today's youth are sensitive.
Uh-huh. Sensitive. Anything else come to mind?
Much more aware.
Aware? Okay. I'll go ahead and kind of move on to the next slide, actually. Because the next slide really is going to speak to some of these perceptions and labels and the way, when it comes into our reporting, the way they use the language, but really for context purposes. And you'll see what I mean once I kind of get into it. And some of these will sound familiar to you, I think, now, more so. You're like, yeah, came into our program as a justice-involved individual, right? Had earned a reputation for having a negative attitude and poor behavior at times. Dropped out of the program 3 times. Had not been home all week. Kind of a truancy that ran away. A high school dropout involved in several criminal activities that have gotten him justice involved. Had burned a lot of bridges here. That was a principal, talking about a youth who was referred to a program. And a more dangerous one at the bottom, a firearm was brandished. All right. So this is kind of just, like I said, this is also usually for context, but a lot of this, and some of you can have probably seen this oftentimes, right? At least I know I see it in the newsprint, right? Or on news reports, right? And usually when you see your local news, they dedicate maybe 2 minutes, right? And some of these things are, oh, that youth, this, you know, oh, he had problems with the law in the past, right? But something that we don't see, and I think that's not really covered oftentimes, right? This is what we see, right? As service providers oftentimes, right? You know, why do they have these labels, or why do they have the behavior? That's what we're trying to figure out. You know, what are the underlying circumstances? What are you going through? You know, what are you know, and some of these, like I said, are you serving? Can you give me some of that challenges that we don't see, that most people don't see, that don't get covered? What are some of these things? And some of them were talked about yesterday, I think, right? But I'll kind of let you give you space to let me know what you think some of these challenges that we don't see, right? And to actually individually work with the youth. You could speak to that. What don't we see?
Well, one thing that comes up for me with that question is also, what are the underlying biases from the teachers? I work in sex trafficking, and I know Black girls especially their bodies are adultified, so they get labeled that more so than their white counterparts. So it's from the teacher that all these negative labels come onto these girls, and they're so negative, and I see how it impacts their self-worth and confidence, and just being labeled as bad girls. And so I think this across the board, when I look at the prison to pipeline and the foster care to pipeline, let's just say school to prison pipeline, school to foster care pipeline, you know, for Black, Latin America, Latino, Latina, Native American, girls and boys, just our youth of color, how it's the teacher that's putting these labels based on their own biases and not from the students. So that's what comes to me.
That's interesting. Actually, that came out to some extent in the previous session, where oftentimes there's just expectations, right? Or there's certain biases, right? Or certain things that are being required from, for lack of a better word, the system, right? But the system takes no opportunity, doesn't try to do the same to find out about the youth, right? That was what was said just recently in the previous one. What other challenges, if any, do our youth face?
Yeah, I'm thinking about like my own nieces and nephews. They were at various ages between like 5 and 15 when they were dealing with traumatic divorce, dealing with bullying at school, dealing with racism. They're very dark skinned. They were, the girls were dealing with sexual identity, all of the normal sort of teenage things. And then on top of it, all of the boys, 3 boys, all had a run-in with the law right at that point when, they went from looking not like little boys, but more like little men.
And I like, this is Janet, that was kind of the direction that I was going. We don't see ACE scores in schools.
Go ahead and move on to the next slide, because I think some of this, what you talk about, is going to come up, and as we see this in the reporting. I'll just give you some examples here, right? Some of the challenges shared about the poverty of his family, right? Is expecting a child in April, right? And again, these are things, while they're going through these challenges, again, the system, right, has other expectations, right? Or hoops, I guess, that they have to get through, right? Committed to this facility due to a mental health crisis, was receiving SPED support services at high school, was referred to us due to school disengagement, truancy, and mental health issues. Mental health again, right? She was home depressed, unable to come to school. Another thing, mental health. And mental health came up actually quite a bit when I started going through my reports. Needing to provide support to the family of a shooting victim. And this kind of ties in with the other one about poverty, right? Whose mother lost her job due to the pandemic, right? So now a youth has to juggle helping take care of family and perhaps also going to school, right? Amongst other, right, possible things that are on their shoulders. Have trouble making friends, right? And these are things, like I said, I don't think we see them, right, when we work with our youth, but I think a lot of times our media does it, excuse me, I gotta, give me a moment. Apologize about that. But these are things I think that sometimes aren't covered in that 2-minute snippet about a youth or a crime or something, or some violent behavior that a youth committed, right, on the local news, right? And these are things I think that we as service providers oftentimes are aware of and know. And such as, I know for me, it's like, when I do watch some of this coverage, right, I'm like, you're being unjust to the youth. You don't know the story of that youth and the challenges, the many challenges that youth have faced, the stresses they're undergoing. That doesn't excuse whatever negative behavior they did, but it does give context and understanding and knowing, okay, well, what can we do to help the youth? Let's try to help them, right? And I'm gonna go ahead and go on to the next slide here, because I think that's kind of where we're gonna, kind of the now what, right? Now that we know about their behaviors and labels, the challenges, right? We know, I mean, based on research now that, our youth brains keep developing well into their early 20s, right? What does success look like for a challenging youth, right? A youth may be failing math, but, for all we know, they probably, it's funny, as a comedian who said this, but I think it's very real. They may not be doing too good in math at school, but they're possibly doing their parents' taxes, which, they're filling out the financial aid forms. They're writing the essays, right? And so, I mean, and next slide kind of speaks to this, what success means at that moment. Success is different for every single youth, right? And this will speak to it a little bit, and also kind of the relationship some of our organizations, our grantees, the relationships they build with the youth and the importance of it. Here, and I got 3 little stories, little snippets, again, snapshots of success, right? This one has to do with weekend basketball. Often people, it's just open gym and kids playing basketball. So I'm going to go ahead and read it here. Weekend basketball continues to be highly successful. Parents have expressed their appreciation for this activity. They like knowing that children are in a safe place on the weekends, right? And this is an evening one, right? I think it starts about at 7 and goes well into about 10, 11 o'clock at night, really. Sometimes later, actually, depending on the youth and what's going on. In fact, one parent showed up to a Friday night basketball in hopes of locating their child who had not been home all week. The youth was, in fact, in attendance and reunited with their family, right? And that right there is huge, right? Because now you can start figuring out, it's a starting point in trying to get whatever issue that youth has for not being home all week, right? Whatever the dynamic was. It's a step in the right direction, trying to figure out what's going on, help the youth and the family. Ultimately, if you're helping the youth, you're helping the family, right? A second one. Kay is an 18-year-old student who was referred to as due to school disengagement, truancy, and mental health issues. Kay struggled academically and had trouble connecting with peers at his high school. He was failing all of his classes, not attending school. Kay has been attending Job Corps for the last year. He obtained his high school diploma this spring and has started the auto mechanic trade. He's expected to graduate Job Corps this summer with perfect attendance and a 3.7 GPA. Again, this is what I guess kind of what flexibility looks like when you're trying to help a youth where the system, the traditional way is not working, right?
On that story, I would be curious to know how Kay got into the Job Corps, right?
That would be through our service providers.
Yeah.
Working with them individually, developing a plan. And so, like I said, and I'll say this is very true. If you don't have a relationship with the youth, you're not going to go anywhere when helping the youth at the end of the day. It really starts with that relationship. And sometimes that's the hardest part. I know, especially for
Karen,
youth.
You're just wanting to understand how the referral was made. Is that?
Yeah, actually, Abraham answered the question,
Okay.
how he went from failing and got into Job Corps. There had to be
It's
a
not that fast,
connection.
clearly. Yeah.
Right, it's not that fast, and
No.
clearly, yeah, there's got to be some connection there, and I just wondered about that.
There's little challenges into that, right? From
Yeah.
transportation to schedules to figuring out when they can get in, making sure it's a good fit. There's a lot of little things, I think, where a lot of our, service providers do all that work, that legwork.
Yeah.
Here's another one. While responding to OHSU, Oregon Health Science University, to provide support to the family of a shooting victim, an incident escalated in a parking lot and a firearm was brandished. Outreach intervened, and because of the relationship, again, they have with the individual, they're able to de-escalate the situation and potentially prevent another shooting from happening. Right? Again, that's a very real issue. And oftentimes, and this is, I don't think a lot of people realize, but shootings happen right after one shooting finished in an act of retaliation, right? The ability to have outreach workers, right, to be able to have that, build that relationship. Sometimes this relationship takes a while to develop with some of our youth. It can take up to a year where a youth feels, confident in being able to share things and build that relationship, kind of, for lack of a better way, let the outreach worker in, I guess, but that's kind of another success stories. And these are things that don't get covered in the media, right? That aren't put out there, that most people are not aware. You always see when the shooting happens, right? But you never know, no one ever talks about, the outreach part of it, how many are being, prevented. That's pretty much the presentation. I'd like to hear any comments or thoughts on this. What's it bring to mind now, seeing kind of what you're seeing being reported and what you see kind of in your organizations or what you know.
You know, Abe, I'll share something now that I've gotten to see this presentation twice. Going back to that first question about perceptions, you know, I was thinking of these layers of perceptions, this outside media portrayal of young people who are either involved or active with gangs or otherwise involved in violence, you know, as victimizers, you know, as being violent. And then I think there's another layer, which is where you begin to see that there are underlying factors in their lives. And that's maybe where you start to see that a youth might also be a victim. But I feel like in my work in direct service and thinking about our programs and what makes them successful, I think there's a third layer, which is going beyond just saying, well, you're a victim of circumstance or these different things happening to you, because it kind of flattens the individual and it also takes away some of their agency. And I think that what makes programs successful is really seeing this whole person, this young person with connections to their community, to their family, with things they're passionate about, with their own goals and vision for themselves, and nurturing all that stuff. And like you said, building the relationship, not just based on like what's happening to a young person, but really like elevating who they are in their personhood beyond, you know, these kind of flat victim or perpetrator kinds of ways of looking at it.
I think Jaime kind of talked a little bit about that self-actualization.
Yeah, exactly.
I think for me, you know, I think about just the extent of the challenge, right, and the opportunity, and how it requires a really holistic approach, right, and a long-term approach. Not biennium, no, not one strategy, not one agency, not one nonprofit, you know, not even one community, you know. And so how do we think that far ahead, and that, you know, what is the wraparound long-term strategy, you know, 18-year strategy?
I think this, when I think of the holistic approach, it also shows the importance of making sure that teachers reflect the students and the cultures that they come from. Because one question I've asked, you know, people is, when did you first have a teacher of color? How old were you? What grade was that? And it's interesting. My first was when I was in the 7th grade. And I had others that say, wow, they went through all of school and they didn't. So I think this just really highlights that if we're thinking, you know, of the whole education system, we need to have that reflected in our teachers, and it's not.
So this is, so what's the, so what's the strategy? I mean, I hear that what are we gonna do? What's our role? What's our piece in this?
That's the question, the $1 million question, right? I mean, a lot of it really is, you know, that's kind of what the YDD is about, right? Through our strategic planning and all that. But ultimately, it's about making sure programming and services needed for the youth are there. Now, mind you, right? Again, kind of thinking holistically and systematically, right? You know, we are one part of the equation when it comes to kind of what we've brought out, because you can zoom out still farther, right? You can start looking at right, this is in our lane, but you know, housing, for example, right? Housing, that's a whole other lane. There's other lanes out there, right, that are part of this bigger equation, right? But you know, kind of bringing that to youth really is making sure, I think, that these relationships are being built, and what we can provide for and helping remove these challenges is happening.
Well, I agree with you, and I think that's the key point. I think that through the grantees and the work of the YDD, YDC, my guess would be that it's one of the most critical elements out of the entire Department of Education system in trying to affect kids' success in school.
I think in school it's part of it, but also outside of school, getting prepared for life, given the challenges that they have in front of them at that point in time. I'm thinking, for example, just an example, a youth, right, who all of a sudden, for things outside their, you know, control, are now the head of the household, right? They have two younger siblings. They're a junior, right? And they're not on track to graduate, but they're thinking about how am I going to take care of my younger siblings so they're not in the same boat I am. I need to get a job right now. You know, right now I'm not thinking about college. I'm thinking about stability, right? That's one example, right? And those are the youth where I think sometimes the structures in place aren't set up for that youth with those challenges, right? Because life happens, right? And we don't have any control of when life like those things will happen, right? Just one day you come home, mom and dad are not home anymore, right? And it's just you and your younger siblings, right? So, you know, those are the ones, that's just one example, right? Divorce and a medical issue away, right? For some kids, right? They have one parent and one medical issue away from being the head of a household. Like, another extreme example, but I don't think it's that extreme or uncommon really with the youth that we're working with, right? Something like that could happen. You know, if it can happen to a regular adult, right? Imagine a youth who's put into that position.
I think you know, when I hear this and I think about our social fabric, right? That basketball court was part of the social fabric of that community and allowed that to happen, right? And they just released a whole study about how, because of the social fabric of the Portland area, we may have saved 2,000 lives because of that connectivity, and that other places without the social fabric have had higher COVID death rates. The hard part is that folks pay for fixes. They often don't pay for prevention, right? And the social fabric is the prevention part. So I guess one challenge for YDD might be to be an advocate for things that enhance the social fabric, that, you know, help provide the stability, address poverty, address the racial ethnic disparities issues, to be an advocate for those things, even if it isn't in our lane, because so many things end up being in our lane because of the lack of, basically, if you have a threadbare social fabric, it's gonna break at some point.
It's kind of aligning, bringing that alignment connection to it. Because I think if it impacts, like you said, our lane, their lanes are being impacted as well, right?
I think, you know, one strategy to explore and is that we have this very encompassing, you know, mission and vision and values. How do we leverage this collective, right, of stakeholders throughout the state to bring others into the conversation? I'm talking about the private sector. You know, would they share our values, our mission, our vision, our philanthropic sector as well, right? I mean, I think we have a lot of resources to work with, right? And how do we leverage all of that, right? So we bring others to the table, so that we can have a 20-year vision, right? So we can be resourced appropriately to do this work.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought up that point. You know, I think there is, right now we have some of that built in, at least I know for our workforce grant, in regards to bringing in the private sector and partnering, right, and helping youth, right? Just speak a little bit about that, right? But I think it's also, there's other opportunities, right? And that's a bigger conversation. Because I think you do need to, you know, bring in all these other voices and resources. I don't have much to add. You know, I want to thank you all for the conversation and your input. I've actually been taking notes as you've been talking as well. Well, Court has as well, actually. But I really appreciate the feedback and your participation in the presentation. I think I'll give you go, and you guys can have some of your free time back, knowing that we're going to be on the screen for quite most of the day today and tomorrow. So.
Awesome. Thanks, Abe.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate Karen's comment. It has been provocative.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing the stories and success.
Yeah.
Challenges and success. That's helpful.
How do I start this over again?
I think you did it, Abe. You did your 2 rounds.
Yeah, that's good.
Nice work. We'll be back. We'll do the RFA, then we'll have some breakouts from 11 to noon, and then people will be.
Oh yeah, so you have a break now anyway. That's perfect.
I was
I was gonna say, are we on break? Is that where we're at?
break. Look
Oh
at
yeah,
that.
10:35 break.
10:45.
10:45. Thank you.
I gotta
Yeah.
check on my son. He came in earlier when I was supposed to take the meeting.
But not good. See you guys.
Lucky.
See y'all in a minute.
Okay.
Yes, you-
just very quickly, Chief Teague, before this big session starts, one thing for the people in my second session, I hope that you all remember the presentation of the law in Texas, which is that an arrest is the point at which a person is compelled to identify themselves or provide identification. So up until you are arrested, you do not have to comply with a request from law enforcement to provide your name or your ID. And so in the video, we saw that there was not a compelling reason that that young man would have had to provide his name or his ID. He told them he was walking home, and he told them that he was okay. And at that point, in my opinion, that should have been the end of the police interaction. But hopefully for everybody who participated in my presentation, we will have the opportunity to continue the conversation at a different time. But please do watch the full videos, and hope maybe we can discuss one-on-one or as a group again. Thank you.
So Melissa, we're on break or we're not on break?
Exactly. Thanks, everyone. I'm just checking our agenda, and we did have a couple minutes scheduled to sort of close out and move to break, but I'm just checking to see if Brian needs to or wants to weigh in, but I think now would be a great time for a break.
He's probably on break.
Right? He might be on break.
I'll take 5 minutes then, that's okay.
Exactly. Let's take 5 minutes. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, I think everyone's on break. I've been on break.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to take a break. I'm going to be away from screen for a minute. Thanks.
All right. I think we're about to come back.
Brian, are you a Chelsea fan?
Yes, I am.
Wow. All right.
Yes, I am. We can talk about that in more detail.
All right, we should. Yep. I'm a Christian Pulisic fan, that's for sure.
Oh, yes, he's not playing much lately, but
we'll have to circle back. We'll have to circle back on that.
Yeah. All right, everyone. We are coming back into the space. Appreciate your participation in those pretty fast morning session presentations and conversation. Really is a way to kind of prime the pump, so to speak, for some information, both for later this morning and then for tomorrow, just to see some places where we're implementing and places where we're either adjusting or just getting information from our grantees and from other partners and stakeholders that, including you all, that, and then a couple of those pieces I think are looking at data and also probably some broader strategies related to disparities and so on. So I hope that was helpful and engaging. We're going to move into a presentation from a couple of staff, Paul and Abraham, and I know this represents the collective work of our grant managers. Felt like I feel like this presentation is important because it does represent, again, something, it's not in the weeds, but it's actually pretty focused and specific, but is an example of where we're pushing forward with our application process and making some adjustments, responding to some of the things I think we've heard over the last year with COVID, and also just from years of doing this work. So in some ways, this represents kind of our beginning implementation of a strategy that I thought would be helpful to kind of give our council at a high level, and then know that we're going to be bringing this topic back to our full council meeting in March for actual approval. But felt like it was important to preview it today. And then again at 11, we'll spend some time in our groups just trying to process, right, and think about how this information comes together. And I'll just say this real quickly. I know we're at 10:50. This afternoon, while you are all back at your work or your retirement or you're just trying to take a breather, we're going to be meeting among some of the members of our planning committee to take the notes that we got from the conversations today and try to put them into some kind of, I don't know if order is even the right word, but into some categories, so that when we meet again tomorrow, you'll have some of that information that you've discussed and talked about. So we're going to help with the meaning making by spending some time this afternoon trying to put it into our different 5 priority areas. So know that we're going to do that work this afternoon and bring it back to you tomorrow for deeper consideration and thought. So I'm going to stop and ask Paul and Abraham to take it from here so we can keep things moving.
Okay. Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. Lindsay, were you able to pull up the presentation?
Yes, I lost my buttons for a second. I do have it. Let me hit share screen.
And Brian, just a time check, because I've been working off my phone and limited screen time. What's our time frame for this, just so that I can monitor where we're at?
Yeah, we're about 10:50, so we have until 11:15. Paul, it'd be nice to try to get us more or less back on track. I cut in about 5 minutes, 6 minutes. So if we can get back, that'd be great. If we're down to 11:15, 11:20, I think it'll just take a little bit from our breakout. So try to get through it in 25 minutes.
Perfect. I think we can do that, right, Abe?
Okay.
All right. So just to start out, my name is Paul Sell. I know I've met many of you virtually. I'm the re-engagement systems manager and been part of the work. And one of the things that Abe and I talked about when prepping for this is we're just going to intro one of the things I think we're excited about as we move into this next biennium of grants. And one thing on the re-engagement side is we're seeing some really innovative and cool programs going, having just finished the grant negotiation meetings. And it'd be exciting to see how those evolve as from the short time frame into a more robust focus in a 2-year span versus that 6-month span on that work. So I'm looking forward to that, and hopefully you'll see some of the lessons learned in this presentation from that last process. Abe?
Yeah, I'm Abraham Magaña. I'm also I'm a community grants manager, kind of for the grants we're going to be talking about today. And I think one of the things I'm really looking forward to, and I'll be talking about a little bit today in the presentation, is our youth solutions funding, which is kind of in the previous iterations of it was called the innovation grant. It's in more or less kind of the same vein, but with a little bit tweaks. I'm really kind of excited to talk a little bit about that because I think it presents a real opportunity for really getting, a new possibly stakeholders or grantees at the table, really, to apply for our grants. So look forward to talking about that.
So our plan today is we'll go through the slides. Abe's going to kind of take this first chunk of information, and then we'll kind of just talk about the details as we move forward.
All right. Well, we can go ahead and start, Lindsay. So you've seen this before. It's our mission, vision, and values. This is actually this presentation is actually going to serve kind of as a template for future presentations when we go out and do some of our community engagement. But we can go ahead and skip this one. Like I said, it's something you've already seen before in Brian's previous presentation. So let's go into kind of what YDC and YDD funding from a really high level, really what it is. We have two kind of high level, I guess, not good branches the way you see it here. We have the youth grants, which is what we're going to talk about today. And then we have our juvenile crime prevention grants, which is more focused, which Anya actually is more of could talk a little bit more in detail, but I'll go into what our youth grants are and what the juvenile crime prevention from a really high level, right? So our youth grants in small print, so I'm going to go ahead and read it just to make sure we can all know what's in them. It's kind of focused on funding support, prevention, intervention services for our youth. And it really targets the youth population, specifically the youth who are disconnected or at risk of disconnecting from school or work, right? That's kind of the main large, overview of what our youth grants kind of fund. The juvenile crime prevention are a little more specific, and I'll kind of read that as well. It's focused on reducing juvenile arrest, juvenile recidivism, or new offenses by juvenile offenders, and the need for beds and facilities operated by the Oregon Youth Authority. Also targets youth population or youth with one or more identified risk factors and are demonstrated at-risk behaviors that have come to the attention of government or community agencies, school or law enforcement. Go to the next slide. So here are priorities and goal, and this is one of the priorities 3, I think that was mentioned also in the previous presentation that Brian had. And part of the priorities is to achieve strategic outcomes through grant making and programs that support youth-centered pathways and practices and affirms identity and safety. So that's kind of what we're doing through our grants. Here are the goals: reducing risk factors, removing barriers to education and workforce, increasing access and opportunity to youth serving organizations, making sure they're locally driven and community-based, they're measurable outcomes linked to program emphasis, culturally responsive and appropriate, sexual and gender identity affirming. So here are kind of our youth grants in more detail. And again, you see a couple more branches. I'll go ahead and start off with the one on top there. Kind of what entails our youth and community investment grants. So these are initiatives aimed at serving youth ages 6 to 24, again, kind of at risk of disengaging from school or work. Grants that address various barriers to educational and workforce success, programming or services that are expected to be measurable, effective, and linked to program outcomes. And reporting outcomes that are included are program specific and include general participant data. Now, kind of on the other side, which is our re-engagement fund, Oregon Youth Re-Engagement Fund, which is kind of what Paul oversees, are initiatives serving youth ages 14 to 21, supporting re-engagement services to reconnect youth towards completing their high school diploma or GED. Grants focus on defined re-engagement services, which include outreach, education, skills training, and supportive programming. Implemented programming and services align with defined re-engagement services and maintain formal partnerships with an educational entity, and reporting outcomes that are predetermined and included both individual and program data on educational progress, outcomes, employment, post-secondary entry, and re-engagement practices. And I'll pass it over to Paul to kind of go a little bit more into the Oregon Youth Re-Engagement Fund.
Abe, I think we might have missed a slide. Lindsay, do you mind going back? Uh-oh, we're missing a slide.
Oh.
All right, well, so Abe, for some reason we missed the initiatives for the Oregon Youth, or for the youth initiatives. Do you want to pull that up on the one I sent? Maybe talk about it here in just a minute.
Give me a moment.
Absolutely. While Abe's pulling that up, so obviously we have our two funds as we move into this next biennium. And so the Oregon Youth Re-Engagement Fund, we're keeping pretty similar branches with the Regional Re-Engagement Collaboration Grant. And you can see that we actually modified that name a little bit to really focus on that collaboration. It's one of the areas that we want to expand as we move into this next biennium with regional collaboratives and regional collaboration among our grantees, as well as expanding re-engagement services. And those are designed specifically around that collaboration and data tracking and the partnerships within those local areas. The regional opportunity grants, those are designed to support the re-engagement program, serving local communities across the state to reconnect youth back to their high school diploma or GED completion. And those, we're gonna keep those similar focuses. You'll see some refinements in the RFA as we move forward with that. Not sure, Abe, if you were able to find that slide.
I can find the slide, but I can't speak to them, the various different initiatives.
Sounds great.
So within the community investment grant portfolio, we have kind of another layer that goes down one. And one of the layers is kind of the distinction between the various different we call them initiatives, right? The first one is our Youth Promise initiative. And I think in the past it was called the Youth and Community Initiative. And that supports youth ages 11 to 18, but there's kind of a caveat that may change that age range. These are right now because some funding comes through DHS and we're in communication with them.
Can
Yes?
you share this?
I'm going off a master document, actually. It's kind of draft right now. Yeah.
maybe it's stuff we can put into the chat.
Yeah, I'm going to add it into, we're going to have to do that. I'm not sure what happened there.
Okay.
And then, now, like I said, it's program services that are improving and sustaining educational engagement and success for at-risk youth. Looking at factors, risk factors. Then we have our Youth and Workforce Readiness Initiative. And it supports existing community efforts to directly support youth ages 14 to 24 with career exploration and skill development services. They're intended to support existing programming services related to career-connected learning, internships, and apprenticeships, soft skills development. And then we have the Youth Solutions Initiative. And this one's the one kind of I mentioned earlier, and it's kind of what I think in the past was called an innovation grant. It's really focused on youth ages 6 to 24, but really for smaller organizations that are applying for funding or have not applied for funding in the past, rural type initiatives, or those type initiatives that maybe are kind of a systems change component and they need some additional funding to kind of help with that. That's kind of what it's geared towards. And then we have our Youth Violence and Gang Prevention, which is focused on preventing and directly supporting youth ages 12 to 24, but preventing youth violence, basically youth that are at risk of committing or being victims of violent crime, and addressing factors leading to or exposing youth to violence or criminal gang activity. And we'll be sure to kind of include that in text in one of the slides when we get the slide deck to you and make it available.
Yes, and I was trying to pull that up while Abe was talking, so I apologize. That slide for some reason disappeared. It was nice and pretty and laid out all of those things. So we'll make sure we get that before we upload. The joys of working with limited internet, so I apologize on that. But Lindsay, if you want to move to the next slide. So this is another kind of a recap of the grants that we have, and you can see the ones that Abe had talked about with the Youth Workforce Readiness, Youth Solutions, and the Youth Promise. Now, what this slide is really showing is connecting the grant type to the organization and really what the work is intended to do through those grant priorities. So you can see that those top three, the regional re-engagement, opportunity re-engagement, and the youth workforce readiness. What you'll see in our RFAs is we're trying to connect those three initiatives together to really help support that work of reconnecting youth and getting them connected with the workforce development range. And we've seen that with the shift with Jared joining us on the re-engagement team as part of the YDD kind of staff realignment work on that. When you see the grant priorities, you can see it's really defined around coordination as regional re-engagement. The opportunity re-engagement is focused on direct service or specific re-engagement services. And the youth workforce readiness is that direct service or coordination around workforce readiness. There in that second column from the right, you can see where we're anticipating the max awards to be for each of those grants. And so the re-engagement grants we've aligned at $240,000 at this point. They are subject to change as we're getting finalized budgets through the next over the course of the next few months. And the workforce readiness upwards of $200,000. Those purple areas there are our youth solutions and our youth promise grants. And really the idea around those is the youth solutions is around new, innovative, or expansion of specific programs. And so you can see in the grant type, we're talking about startup or system change, also really focused on that smaller rural programming idea. They are maxed awards at $100,000. And we're trying to help encourage organizations that are just starting up or smaller organizations to apply for some of these grant services and access. The Youth Promise is a larger grant, as Abe was talking about. There's still some things being worked out with that. And that's focused on direct service as well as larger programming and larger awards up to $200,000. And then that green piece is the youth violence and gang prevention, really focused on direct service and prevention around obviously youth violence and gang prevention. So trying to support reentry services, community outreach, and trauma-informed work. So if in that max award is up to $100,000. I see a question here. Sorry, I'm trying to read it. Are the youth solutions intended for organizations starting up or existing organizations? So the youth solutions are really kind of a broad category that we're trying to encourage both those startup organizations, but also organizations that may not need the higher level funding of $200,000. And so it's kind of a combination. Abe and I were joking earlier that it's kind of that versatile player for us as we're trying to roll these grant solutions out. I see Brian smile. I appreciate the smile on the athletic references there. So Eric, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. You had said new organizations or startup organizations, and I just wanted to clarify that existing orgs could apply for Youth Solutions Grant for new initiatives, basically.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. So, Lindsay, if you want to move to the next slide, the next set of the slide deck is really talking about some of the goals we have with these RFAs. And so kind of give a conceptual thought around what we're doing is we're trying to keep our youth grants as consistent process as we can. So combining the youth and community grants as well as the re-engagement grants. So the process looks pretty similar, as well as kind of navigating the same arena with that. So when we talk about this work, we're really focused on trying to expand the YDD grant portfolio. And one of the goals that we've heard is working to create regional equity and opportunity. So spreading out our grants as throughout the state, but also still supporting the organizations that we've been very closely aligned with in some of the other areas. So hopefully some of the plans that you'll see that we're contemplating doing will help focus on that. Obviously the alignment and connection with re-engagement and workforce. And another key piece that I think as we kind of move into these next sets of slides is the regional re-engagement collaboration grant. We're really wanting to support and expand existing programming as well as develop new re-engagement or beginning re-engagement programs. But when we talk about expanding the YDD portfolio, we're kind of putting that on pause right now. Not that it's not an important element, but when we're talking about the RFA and kind of that that process that we'll be outlining here in the next couple of slides. Try to set that to the side for a minute when we start talking regions. And then also the last part is kind of development of some new application tools. And so one of the things that I know Abe is working on right now is kind of an application screener to help applicants figure out which grants to apply for, because we do have a pretty broad set of grant opportunities focused on different areas, as well as the grant type and initiative connection. So we want to really help tie the appropriate grant funds to the initiative and to the goals that applicants are applying for. And then lastly, the application questions tied to the grant type. So we've spent a lot of time trying to simplify our application process while also tying it to the specific type of grant that applicants are applying for. Abe, did you want to add anything to the development of those new application tools?
Yeah, I can go ahead and talk a little bit about it. It really is kind of like what you said, a screener eligibility, ensuring that our grantees are applying in the right kind of grant focus. And a lot of these are kind of just really controlled and making sure that they're aware and always tying it back to the essence of the grant scope, right? That the work falls within it. That way there's no confusion, really.
All right. So Liz, if you want to move to the next slide. So Molly, hopefully you'll notice the title there, the fuzzy lines. And this is a conversation that came out of our committee work with the re-engagement and workforce committee that we really, as grant managers, we tried to really take to. So one of the things we talked about is how do we take an application model or a regional model into the application process for YDD. And so a couple of things to recognize is that there's a ton of regional models out there around the state of Oregon. So one of our goals as grant managers was to utilize a current regional map or concept and not add to the complication of those systems, as well as flexibility within the region. So going to that fuzzy line idea, and then also establish communication channels. So as we were starting the community engagement process for this RFA, for these RFAs, we're obviously going to be doing it in a different venue, meaning virtual. And so we want to make sure that we have some ways to utilize some already established communication channels. And so when we thought about how to expand our portfolio, we were focused on how do we kind of do this as a regional design to group grant applications to really expand it, but also support our current grantees in the area. So again, the regional collaboratives for re-engagement, that's kind of a later design work. So try to set that to the side as we're talking about these regions. Some of the goals that we had was to possibly subgroup in larger regions. So when you look at different regional models throughout the state, there's some really large areas. Eastern Oregon is a classic example of a ton of surface area with less population. And so how do we help support those areas as well as supporting a more highly dense population density in a metro area? And then the process to support applicants with established service areas across application regions. So any region that we set up, we recognize that there's going to be applicants that are serving organizations throughout different regions, and there's going to be some overlap. So how do we set up our process to support that with those already established service areas? And then this is a competitive grant application process. And so our goal with creating these fuzzy lines in the regional award concept is that the application review is scored with grant type. And so that is a new concept for us. It's going to be what we're talking about doing is similar to what we did with the re-engagement, where we have teams of reviewers focused on a specific grant type. So they're not having to really focus on all of the needs and all of the grant descriptions as they're working to score those. And then the criteria to award top applicants in each region and then ranked awards thereafter. So we haven't determined any numbers of specific applicants to award, but maybe the top couple awardees in a region would be awarded, and then throughout the state, and then all of the other applicants at that point would be ranked. Again, a similar concept that we applied to the re-engagement side. Next slide, please, Lindsay. And so one of the things that we talked about at the last committee meeting for workforce and re-engagement was some concepts around possible regions for these for this regional award concept. We showed at the last one, we showed a workforce map. This is another one that came up, and again, just some possible thoughts around it. The grants management team really kind of liked the regional solutions map. There's an established communication pathway set up within it. It also is similar to a lot of the workforce regions as well in terms of the large classifications. And again, not any region is going to mirror anyone exactly, but the idea of being able to group within larger organizations. So if we look, our larger regions. So if we look at the Valley North Coast region, you can see 3 different colors of green. And what we're contemplating is, does it make sense to be able to set up a large region, but then if there's pockets within that area that has a certain set number of applicants, would it make sense to make, so to speak, a sub-region to help, again, diversify our grants within that? So that's kind of a concept that we're looking at. Again, just an example of possible regions that we're kind of been looking at on that. Lindsay, next slide, please. So moving within that, with those regions, then we're kind of move into the application alignment between the youth and community grants as well as the re-engagement grants. So what applicants will see is application questions that are a common format, but grant specific. And so all of the responses will be based off of that grant description and how organizations and applicants would meet that need of that specific grant. So application evaluation would be looking for that connection between the grant type and the services, as well as the question that's designed around it. So question types, you can see those bulleted things there, would be talking about the organization, the youth population that was intended to serve, the service area, and so they'll talk in detail about that, program services, which would really dive deeper into what that specific grant would look like, an equity focus, an equity focused question, as well as the partnerships, both that are established as well as looking to establish, and then a budget, both a proposed budget, but also a budget narrative describing what that budget would be used for. Next slide, please. And so always the big question, and doing more and more of this community engagement, I'm realizing this is the biggest question, hence why it's towards the end of the slide deck, is the estimated timelines. And so we're going to be rolling out community engagement here in March and April. You can see the RFA launch. We're hoping to have that out. Well, obviously it'd be after the next YDC council meeting, but sometime in that March-April range, and then having the RFA open. Our goal would be around 60 days, if at all possible. That's where we tried to stick with that, with the re-engagement RFA. The scoring would happen in that May-June range, and then the conditional award notifications and negotiations would happen throughout the summer months. And so that's our estimated timeline at this point. Obviously, there's lots of factors that go into that, but just trying to give some guideline on what that looks like. Next slide, please. I'm trying to remember what the next one is. So that is the end of it. Abe and I probably should have put questions or thoughts here at the end. And Brian, I'll look to you in terms of timeline wise as well.
Thanks, Paul and Abe. Yeah, that was quick. Yes, I appreciate it. Wanted to, again, just, having been in the conversations this morning, I know there's work. If I start to put our work into some categories, and I think that these are pretty aligned with the priorities, but there's policy work that we need to do. And so I'd encourage in our small groups today and tomorrow to talk more about that. There's this grant making work, which you can see because of the timelines that we're on, we needed to get out in front of the grant making priority 2 or 3. So we just wanted to share with you that we've done some thinking. We've heard some feedback and are doing that. I think a through line through all of this work is communication and engagement. And I know that's sort of been captured in priorities 4 and 5 to some extent. You see that we're as a part of the grant making piece, the engagement is an important priority. So that's just a little bit how I'm starting to think about this. I know, again, we got a little bit into the weeds and into the tactics, but that was on purpose, right? We needed to give you some of this so you could just kind of hear it and know that we're doing some deeper thinking around that priority around grant making. So we just have a few minutes. Are there quick questions? I think we can do this for 4 or 5 minutes just because I don't want to leave y'all, hanging. So hands up would be helpful so that I can do that. And then Janet, I see Jeff. I don't see other folks on the next page yet, but I'm looking. And I'll, I'm going to do this to you. I know and appreciate our youth committee folks who are sticking with us in this. Coy's got a thumbs up. Maybe I have a question, I'm not sure. But youth committee, I'm going to ask you all first. Do you have any questions or comments? And I know Maricela is on here. I don't know if other youth committee members are on or not. I see Maricela.
I think I've seen Deanna join.
Yeah.
Right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Maricela. Diana, I see. All right. Again, Coy, since I haven't, did you have a comment or a question? Since we're happy.
Just a quick question. Yeah, I wasn't sure. Sometimes these Zoom things, I don't know like how to raise my hand. But one thing I know that we've talked about before in our meetings is the role of the council in voting for these grantees that come in. And oftentimes we don't have enough information or enough time to make educated and informed votes and just go based on the recommendation of YDD. So I want to just kind of lift up ways to kind of enhance our involvement in that process, so that way we have a better understanding of the grantees prior to voting yes in some of the voting yes for those grants that are coming through at our table.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And I think generally, part of wanting to get out in front of some of this information was so that you all would understand the process and then know that the recommendations are happening obviously at kind of a committee level. And in some cases, I think we probably have some council members involved, but there are also conflicts that we have to be aware of. So appreciate you lifting that up. I don't know if others have questions or any follow-up to that.
I can talk just a little bit.
Go, Abe.
Go ahead,
Abe. I know in the past, I think we've had council members, I think in the last previous re-engagement, you can refresh my memory, Paul, but I think we had some council members participate in some of the reviews, did we not?
We had non-voting members, so Sam Coy had done it, but yeah, making sure we have a quorum and all that is a piece. But yes, we try to involve as many as we can.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Janet, then Jeff, then Eric, and that will probably be about all we can do. Janet.
I just wondered if in the process you guys talked about with streamlining and readjusting regions and readjusting what your targets are in the grants, have the grantees been part of that process?
We're getting ready. Oh, sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Well, I would just say yes. I mean, I think this represents feedback from our recent re-engagement process, from some of you who are on committees and therefore are also grantees. I think we've heard in my tenure, lots of great feedback. And I think over the last year, there's been different, who have done surveys and engagement with our grantees that have and these shifts and changes represent engagement over, I'd say, more than several months to a year of feedback and input. Paul?
Yeah, and I was going to say engagement. Exactly, and we're heading into the broader community engagement side of things, and so that's where a lot of this is draft language right now. And so I know with the re-engagement process and the community engagement, we heard things that did shift some of the pieces once we really got into that community engagement side. So I think we're kind of all anxiously awaiting it. It is a new dimension of the virtual community engagement, so that's going to be interesting with all of the grants, but Abe and I are working on that as kind of that next steps piece. So hopefully we'll have more with that as well. But we did hear positive pieces back from the re-engagement side of this work.
Thanks, Janet. Jeff?
I'm good. I thought you were just checking to make sure we were paying attention when I raised my hand.
Nice. Okay, good. Then we'll go to Eric. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. My comment was just in response to Coy's point, which I think is really valid. You know, making sure council members are as aware and educated as we can be on what we're voting on. And my response would also be the work that the strategic planning subcommittee has done has really helped inform the framework for the grants. And I think in particular, you know, Abe mentioned just that the application questions and the screening processes are a little more tracked and batched based on our priorities. So I would say also that's our role as council members, is to help create and really embrace that strategic structure, so that, not to say that every proposal that comes in is going to be a clear win, but that it's batched and more logical and in line with our priorities as a council. So that's my comment.
Eric, yeah, and thanks, Coy. I don't know, Cord, you put a comment in the chat, which I'd encourage everybody to look at, but do you want to have the last word, and then we'll move to more group conversation?
Oh, sure. Just to say, I appreciate the council's request for more insight. I think we've tried to find ways to create more information ahead of time, especially about the process. About the grants themselves, it's definitely challenging, but I think we'd be open to discussing, are there ways we could be creative and get that info out? And I see Tabidi has his hand up, so I want to pause there.
Yep. Sorry, Tabidi, jump in there.
Oh, no, I was just going to make a comment about just in the efforts of equity, navigating this question of population density in grant making. So we want to be equitable. There are 8 regions, so you know we cannot equitably divide up those grants in you know, trying to have that mindset. If you have a greater density in Portland, right? Because we're trying to service the population. I mean, I'm sure the committee knows this. I just want to say it. I know this is being recorded, right? And then you say, oh man, there are 5 other really great grants here, but maybe in this region, we didn't give out any, but perhaps it doesn't have the same merit as, you know, just, you know, these are going to be issues, okay? These are going to be issues, and, you know, and I know equity is not, nothing is simple, but just, you know, how do we navigate? I mean, we have to be mindful of navigating this attempt to get equity and not actually undermine the efforts that, the impetus behind, you know, doing this.
Yes. Thank you, Tabidi. All right. Okay. Now I got Jaime. So, I mean, this is rich stuff. So we're eating into our breakout time, but if everybody's okay with that, I'd rather get the comments into the room. I see a thumbs up from folks. So I'll shut my mouth. Jaime.
I don't know how to take my hand down, but anyways, so in terms of resources, right, we have this 17 million, 18 million, I don't know what it is exactly to work with. We're not the only ones that are investing in youth development work, right? There are a ton of philanthropic institutions in the state. There's a private sector. Nike has its own foundation. Actually, I think it's the largest in the state. You know, how do we leverage those resources as well, right? And we have players in this table and allies that can bring those folks to the table, so we have more to work with, right? Because it ain't gonna be enough. We already know that, right? But when you add all those pieces, there's plenty to work with.
Appreciate that, Jaime. And you know, I'll just mention that there was a kind of funders network that existed in the past among foundation and philanthropic leaders. Had the chance to connect with some folks at Oregon Community Foundation in the fall, but I think you're right on, and being in those conversations and being collaborative, transparent, engaged, so that we understand where our investments are going, where their investments are going, and in leveraging. I deeply appreciate that. Okay. Any other questions or comments?
So Brian,
hands. Paul?
I would add, I think that conversation around how do we support has really been rich among the grants team. Like, we're trying to figure out, like, how do we get into some of these areas that we know need support that we're not necessarily in, but still balancing with the great programs that we currently have. And that I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a huge question we have, and it's really been a deep conversation for us of how do we do that. And that's again, Molly's fuzzy lines, I think, really hit all of us in that committee meeting, which was so true. I think even most of the committee members were laughing about it, because it was just one of those things of, like, how do we create that to support that culture? So it has been a deep conversation. So know that is a big piece for us as well.
Thank you. And I see a comment from Molly about council can provide some guidance on format or questions that they have around grant awards and as they're presented. I don't know, Molly, if you, I think we're going to be bringing not grant awards, but this process back to you in March in a little bit more refined detail. So know that we're doing our best to get out in front and not come to you in June with, like, hey, we need to vote on these awards. So we're giving you this preview today and then one in March. But if there are specific questions, why don't I maybe do it this way? This is a perfect example of some time spent in some small groups, I think, and thinking about priority 3. But more just generally, if in small groups, if there are questions that you are eager to hear or hear back from us on, get those into that. We will take very clear notes, and we will capture that, and then can have that as a strategy or activity moving forward. Sound good? All right, we're gonna have about 20 minutes, but in some smaller groups, which I think, if nothing else, for those who don't want to put everything out into the big group, you'll have some chance to wrestle with a little bit about this, a little bit of this. Let me ask real quickly, Melissa or Lindsay, probably Lindsay, do we have public comment that is gonna come up today?
No, we do not.
We do not so far. Okay, so we're gonna take this probably right up to about 11:55, and then we'll have 5 minutes just to adjourn. And if a comment needs to come up, then if anybody has a anecdote or a story that is inspirational that they can end us on, we'll take it. But Melissa and Lindsay, can you push us out? You're going to go into these groups. They're your fruit groups, and then note takers will take notes. But for those of you looking at the agenda, you'll learn more about which fruit you're associated with.
Great, here we go.
Hey, Ryan.
Hey. Didn't know what fruit I was going to get.
You're in peach.
Better than apple. That was my one request.
You just didn't want to be with the apples, huh?
Yeah, no, I'm weird about that. Apples are like fingernails on chalkboard to me. It's something about the frequency of it that just completely takes over my nerves. It's weird. So,
well, all right. So Brian, you in that Google Doc?
I'm not in the Google Doc, but I have it right here. So let's.
Great. So you'll just take us down. I don't need to dominate anything, but I see the peach group down a little ways, Ryan. I think you'll find it. It's just, you got to scroll down to find it.
Yeah, so I'm looking at, let's see here. I'm looking in the notes.
Yeah, you just got to scroll. It's there's other notes in there, so it's kind of not at the bottom, but it's peach group members, small group breakout. So I'll just in the vein of like, you got it.
Yep.
You guys need to, thanks, I see Ryan there. You guys should pick a facilitator, and I wouldn't worry too much about, I mean, Ryan, you can help with timekeeping. Ryan's also going to help with notes. So there are, and maybe I'll just keep us rolling in terms of trying to help facilitate. We wonder what questions you have. We wonder what themes you're seeing and what actions or activities are emerging. So those are the 3 questions we want to spend the next 20 minutes or so on, based on what you've heard this morning. And
okay,
I'm gonna be quiet. Diana, I see you. I don't really see you, but I see your name.
So we had a nice discussion. We had a nice discussion with Sanji with our 2 groups.
Right.
But nobody in the room here was in either of those 2 groups, I don't think. So
Yeah, which is, yeah, by design.
Okay.
Yeah, we trying to mix people up, but this is the same group you will be in tomorrow.
Okay.
So Ryan, you'll be with this group. I'll be with this group. So we will be in this group now. And we have a couple other folks. Adrian is obviously here, but Janine and Nikia, there are a couple folks that weren't able to join us, but maybe with us tomorrow. So I don't know, what questions are coming up for folks after what they heard?
Yeah, because guys, I mean, if you have questions, I think what's happening here is we're documenting them all between all the groups, the breakout groups, and then as a division, we'll discuss them in terms of being able to provide answers for those. So I mean, even if the people that presented for you earlier aren't present here today, you're not going to need those answers right away. We'll get them to you. So you know, anything that you can think of to kind of keep those creative juices flowing for our people, our folks, would be fantastic. Jaime, I know you've already contributed a ton.
I do have a question, but I'll defer to others.
Adrian, jump in there.
Yeah, I think for me, 2 kind of questions arose that I really resonate with. Was it Coy that just asked the question as far as how it is, let's see, because I'm new to the council, so, and then I came in right when the vote happened. And so, one, I didn't know the process even getting there. So it is nice having it kind of laid out now, just understanding the background and the process. But at the same time, I'm thinking, how can I step, you know, how can we get a little bit more, you know, information so that it's not just a, you know, for lack of a better term, rubber stamp, like we're saying yes, but I still don't know. And it's hard, even if I think as a member, I sit in one of the reviewers, but the categories of funding, but then you still don't know about the rest. So just how can we get engaged a bit more, or is there background information? And I know it's hard because it is so many pockets of funding. So I know that probably wrestling with how do you do that? And then the other, in one of the groups, someone just said, okay, so as a council, how can we help more? You know, so it's nice to get all this information, but at the same time, like, what more can I do in this? So yeah.
Great, I've got that written down here. So, you know, just to touch on that real quick, Brian can absolutely correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in some cases, could even pick up the phone and make a call to, you know, Brian or one of the division staff and have a conversation about that, because it's really unique. We got 10 people in our division, maybe 11 now if we count the new hires, but we deal with both re-engagement, workforce development, and grants, and we deal with the enforcement of negative rights, constitutional rights under 4th Amendment, racial ethnic disparities, and there's a wide breadth of work that we do as a division, and we're a small group of people. And so there is a lot that we're not able to share or talk about just because of the time constraints during our get-togethers. And so sometimes just kind of having those conversations, getting to know your staff a little bit better and learning more, then maybe it might become more clear about where your role is to play outside of the rubber stamping, right? To kind of hone in on that. That's just my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I want to not answer every question that's asked just because, but Ryan is, is generally right. Like the quick answer is sort of like, let's make sure that there's clarity about role and the best use of council member time, and then ensuring that we've created enough trust and knowledge that when we bring a grant decision or grant making decisions, it's not a rubber stamp, but it's like, oh yeah, we know, we understand the process. We know that there was a diverse group of folks involved with reviewing and making a recommendation to give money. Like, cool, like we're good. And we know our best use is not getting necessarily into the details around a grant decision, but advocating with legislators and giving us what folks should we be engaging with on the community end, so that we're getting their input, feedback, and funding their programs, right? So I think, and then helping direct us towards like policy and other ideas. My sense is that's the best, in an ideal world, role for our council is those kinds of things, not necessarily like, tell me about this grantee that you gave $50,000 to, because we want you to have told us about that months earlier, and then they now know about the funding that YDD gives, and then we are now saying, oh, you told us about them, now we're actually giving them some money.
And let me clarify a little bit.
Go, Adrian.
And to not getting down into the weeds. Definitely don't want to get down into the weeds, and want to make sure that the team feels empowered, like we do trust them. But I think as we're talking about strategy, we're talking about holistic, we're talking about how do we make a dent, like I want to feel that, it's like, how can I really step into that? And I know the grant making process is a part of it. And so when I mean rubber stamp, it's not in a negative, in the sense that I am fully confident in our team and that they're doing the work, but still, I take my experience from being on the Portland Children's Levy, like as a person that was one of the 5 up there, I didn't get into the weeds, but then we had robust discussions about kind of the strategy, and especially with some, whether it's foster care or really discussing that, that's what I'm talking about. So please, if the rubber stamp came across more negative, I really apologize for that. It's not that it is, it's more of it, definitely trusting that, but still having that engagement as we're talking about strategy, like wrapping it all together and figuring out where we can plug in. For example, I'm also on the Oregon Community Foundation, their Portland Leadership Metro region. Yep. And so when grants, when organizations apply, we as council members get the whole list, and we can then say, okay, what we, any background information about the nonprofits that are applying, but even pre that, just making sure that people, because as you know, OCF funds throughout the whole of Oregon, making sure that those that can help with what we are talking about, and not as was it you, Jaime, that mentioned that there are more than, we're one of many funders. I think that was you. So, I want to make sure that through my network that I'm still letting you all know these are other options, even outside of OCF, because I think a lot of people know about that, but others. So, yeah. So again, hopefully, yeah.
That idea, I was on the Metro Leadership Council actually at one point too, and having, I can't remember when they brought the list of grants that they were going to make to the council. I think it was after they had already essentially either been awarded or about to be awarded, but it was like, here they are, here's all the Metro region. That's an interesting, yeah, there's something.
Yeah, they just sent it to us. It's before they take it to the board. So it's like staff is getting information, so we can speak into the leadership, we can speak into financial health or any, connection to the community. So they send us both the state grants as well as Metro region. So even in this last time, in both categories, I was able to highlight around 3 to 5 in each one that I personally knew and could say, you know, what I would recommend or the health of the organization or the leadership, et cetera.
Well, and it's, of course, we are subject to these public meeting laws. So part of what we do is we don't want to tell you until like I don't want to say the last minute, but the last moment when we're ready to actually make it public. Like if we could tell you weeks, like when we're actually like ready, but then that of course would be part of the public record. It's like, it's an interesting logistical thing to have to think about. I'm talking too much. Hi, Meg, Diana.
For Diana. Hi.
Hey there. Hi, I'm mainly like listening, observing, taking things in. It reminds me, we spoke, what was it, like, when did we have a meeting, Brian? And everyone, like,
couple weeks ago, I think.
Yeah, so I think this is really echoing like what we shared and adding to that. And I can elaborate a little bit for folks who were not there. So we had a meeting with youth council members and really sharing what we believe would help us and would have helped us when we first joined, and what could help individuals who will come after us or who will join, right, during our time here. And so a lot of us were either children of immigrants ourselves, have been in the system. And a lot of these systems are very new to us. And it's kind of reassuring to hear that other folks also would like more like guidance and additional support. Because yeah, even now there's some pieces that I'm like, okay, how do I fit in? Like, what am I trying to add? How do I add value? And what do I take that helps me? So I just really want to echo what has been said. And yeah, I'm really here trying to absorb and learn to be more of an active player in this whole thing, because it is still very new to me and a lot of government systems and whatnot. So yeah, thank you, Brian.
So if we could kind of, because I'm trying to take notes here too and try to best capture what we're saying. And there's 3 categories, you know, what questions do you have, what themes are you seeing, and what actions or activities are emerging or would you like to happen? So I kind of want to keep that in the forefront of your minds as we're talking about this, because like Diana, if I'm writing down your comments, where would you see that being? And how would you want to paraphrase that and capture that?
Oh, can we come back to me, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know where my stuff is at, Ryan. But just to kind of, I think, piggyback on what Diana was saying, right, in terms of onboarding and knowing what role we can play. You know, I've been here for, I think, 9 years. I can't remember exactly. But I think my question and my comment is like, what do you all need, right? What is the staffing model? The well-resourced staffing model for us to move this forward, right? I mean, Ryan, you've been at this, you know, since the beginning as well, right? As we have others as well. Feels like we have a lot of like institutional knowledge, right? We have new talent as well. There's a lot of momentum. And what do you all need, right? That can support, for example, the onboarding of youth members, of new members that can help us build a strong team within the council, right? Map out, you know, our network so that we can contribute to different strategies. But you all are the one that are doing the work. And I think this is just my perspective that you're under-resourced. Look, we have 6 to 24 continuum. Right. Nobody's got that. We've been centered on racial justice since the beginning. Not like last year when it became popular, right? And it's in the governor's budget. We've been at this for a decade. And I think we got to tell that story, right? So that this is properly resourced.
I like that.
Ryan, I threw some stuff at the bottom just as I was listening in bottom section.
Okay.
Thanks, Herman. I think I think as we organize around and come together around this strategic planning, I think I think we can better advocate for the resources that are needed. And it's not for YDD, YDC, but to serve the needs in the community. Are there themes that you know, or and Diana, you kind of, I wrote at the bottom the actions activities thing. Just the onboarding and orientation is like something I've heard that we can improve. That's just I've heard that prior to today. But are there other ideas that you have heard that are continuing to come up for you, or Jaime, as somebody who's been around, like are there just like, this is a ongoing challenge that we can capture?
Can I offer a simple one?
Yeah, right. Hey, Diana.
Sanji and I have been having a lot of internal discussions because we're both the compliance monitors for the 4 core requirements of the Act. And we've historically, the YDD has, because of the way the program is designed, sort of treated them separately. We've done 3 core requirements over here that I monitor for, and then racial ethnic disparities kind of does its own data analysis over here. But we're having internal discussions about how to marry those so that at least in the state's perception and optically, we are educating people and folks out in the field, and her and I are partnering that we want to look at these Fourth Amendment extended court protections for juveniles that are in law enforcement or by court authority in some kind of confinement custody, but looking at it through the racial ethnic disparity lens. And so right now there's kind of no direction that, I mean, we are doing this work because it's good work that we can see a path forward for some of this. But also, I mean, there are little tiny things like that sometimes that if council members were to, you know, kind of hone in on that, there are some great recommendations and suggestions and work that can even be done in terms of formalizing and solidifying that we will address the 3 core requirements through a racial ethnic disparity lens. You know, there's lots of work. And as you said, Jaime, you know, being understaffed, yeah, we're under-resourced. We have, even if we did have all the resources and all the money and funding, we still only have like 11 people. Dealing with youth 6 to 24. So, I mean, there's just, in terms of focus and priority, you know, there's a lot that we could do.
I think I wanted to add now to the what actions do you want to take. So during the meeting that I mentioned about, well, actually, as of last year, we had planned a retreat or a conference, you know, event for youth members. And so it was all put on hold because of the pandemic. But when we met again, we realized that it's very important and we would really like to move forward with that. So that is something, what actions do you want to take? It's that planning, you know, and having tangible items that we can take on as youth council members and kind of feel like we have a duty. Because based on when I was talking to Isatu and Maricela separately after like our last meeting, they're like, yeah, what exactly is like our role? And, you know, can we come up with those items, not really those being forced on us, like, hey, this is what the councils want to talk about, or like they want to talk about, so here you go, come up with this workshop, but more of like we spearhead that in collaboration with the entire council and Sanji and Anya and whatnot. And I would also like to see in the actions, it's really seeing youth who are right now in the system being actively involved in the council. So I spoke and I talked about work that I've done at McLaren, and I would love to like collaborate, bring them in, hear their input, and have that not be like a one-time thing, like, oh, we're having this event, workshop. I felt used in the past as a teen who has a story, and I wouldn't want to bring that on to any youth. So it'd be cool to have them actively involved, not just, hey, we want to know, for everyone else's learning and entertainment, but can you actually be involved and help us?
I'm hearing that, and Diana, I've heard this before. I'm just going to say it back to you, like on that last point, like adding, it's a clear action, adding youth with that, I don't know, clear lived experience, institutional experience, but yeah, not as window dressing, full-fledged council. We can figure out the logistics. And I think that's a powerful need. Thank you.
Hey, Diana, by the way, Ezekiel is out. He got what's it called, a pardon from the governor.
After all?
Yep.
Oh, that's amazing.
Enough.
I'm sorry, y'all. Jaime and I worked together, and it was dope work that we did. Jaime actually introduced me to the council, and that's how I'm here. And yeah, we've got connections with people. Sometimes they call me, but I know that like I can't pick up because of rules and stuff. So I'm like, I'm sorry, I hear you, I see you, I'm sending you my thoughts. But yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing, Jaime.
Yeah, I think he's a great asset, and you know, he's stabilizing, but he's got a wealth of experience.
Maybe we can get him on board. Y'all, Ezekiel is dope. I'm sorry, but I've met some of the most amazing folks at McLaren.
What's his, I would love to capture it in the notes if I can. Ezekiel Vasquez. I'm writing it in, Ryan.
Yeah, he's GED. He's got his college degree at Owen at McLaren.
Yeah.
I mean, just doing amazing things. And you know, was 14 when he came into the system, and he wants to do youth development work. And he wants to.
Is he at McLaren currently, or is
he's out?
Yeah. Okay.
With the help of Jaime.
He's doing side jobs, and he's also working for a nonprofit part-time.
Hey, if you're able to, I would love to connect. We're constantly hiring. I would love to recommend him, and he could be full-time.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So yes, that's awesome. Thank you.
Look at that. Good. Job reference.
Yeah.
His goal is to dismantle Measure 11. So how about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you put that on the list?
Yeah.
What? Dismantle that we're putting that at the
Measure
bottom.
11. Put it on the list. Yeah.
Dismantle it, man.
Dismantle measure.
And adding to that, like what I love about our employer is that we're a second chance employer. Like we're not asking, we're nothing. And it's awesome to allow individuals to like come in and be in this environment. And it sucks that a lot of youth really can't get this chance because of their background.
All right.
Second chances, which is being.
We're switching over to the other room, guys. I'll see you there.
Well.
All right. That was fast, right? The morning is, I don't know if maybe it wasn't fast for you, but it was fast for me. That it's noon, or at least 5 minutes to noon. Just Lindsay checking in with you real quickly. Any public comment?
No, not that I have.
We appreciate those who are guests in our space today. We just, in jumping into some of our breakouts, appreciate that. Not hearing any specific public comment. I do need to, I know that Karen and Celeste both had to jump off. So I'd like to have a council member adjourn us officially, and maybe if there's any, that person can get the last word. I'm not going to call.
Story if you all want one. So.
Oh, Jaime, you have another story?
It's another short one.
I see some nodding. Let's go with it. We'll see you all tomorrow, just real quickly, tomorrow afternoon. So, Jaime.
So I just got permission from my friend here to share this. So let me share it. My name is Jordan. I'm a student hoping to be the first in my family to go to college. As the eldest, I've had to learn to be independent, to help others who can't help themselves, and to take charge of my own growth, emotions, and responsibilities. Our family includes 5 children, 2 parents, all of which are very unique.
Hey, Jaime, real quick, your audio is something that's going on. I don't know what, but I like want to hear it so desperately that I just figure.
Can you hear me?
That sounds better.
Okay, sorry about that. So let me start again here. My name is Jordan. I'm a student hoping to be the first in my family to go to college. As the eldest, I've had to learn to be independent, to help others who can't help themselves, and to take charge of my own growth, emotions, and responsibilities. Our family includes 5 children and 2 parents, all of which are very unique. My brothers who follow me, Antonio and Jose, twins, are very special. A lot of times, they are the reason we worry. Next is Lucia. She's timid, motherly, and loves everything that has to do with home. And lastly, the charismatic baby brother who always gets what he wants. My parents are complete opposites. While my mother is loving and supportive, my father just kind of drifts and allows what happens to happen. I worry for Antonio. With the enormous amount of knowledge and vocabulary he has stored in his head, I can't see a reason why he isn't in college already. We currently attend Roberts High School, which is a structured learning center. In the first 3 weeks as Roberts, he was absent 3 days and ditched just yesterday. He's clinically depressed and may also be schizophrenic. My mother takes him to counseling sessions, but it's hard for her to do so because she has other worries. Plus, there's no real value in attending because my father, although essential to Antonio's healing, is not willing to participate. She also takes care of the household, occasionally works, and most importantly, she's there for my brother, Jose. While Antonio's needs include mental stability and attention, Jose's are more immediate. Jose is blind and autistic. It's a daily struggle with my brother. He needs supervision at all times. He cannot do many things for himself, like take baths, go potty, eat, or dress himself. He often gets uncontrollably angry. When Lucia was in the womb, my father was sentenced to jail for allegedly hitting my brother. At school, they noticed Jose had a bruise and scratch on his shoulder. Coincidentally, the neighbor had heard screaming one night, which was undeniably my brother, but that's something he does. The bruise was due to Jose throwing a fit at a store, which resulted in him falling out of a shopping cart. Jose's blow-ups are common and irregular, but are becoming more dangerous now as he's bigger. Trying to prevent any casualties has forced our family to change. For Steven's 10th birthday party this year, I had to sit outside with Jose so he wouldn't hit anybody. He's silly upset by crying babies. This past week at church, there was a crying baby and Jose basically interrupted the whole service. Everyone shares when he has his tantrums because they don't know what's happening. We do what we can to keep him under control, but we all had to make sacrifices. I remember the summer it got so bad that they had to go to ER and give him sedatives. The only break my mom ever got from home is when Jose goes to school and when she works. Let me tell you about when she works. Sure, she makes the money, but it's hard to replicate the labor she does at home. When she works, either Lucia, Antonio, or I have to take care of Jose. In those situations, I take charge because it's a war to have Antonio feed, much less bathe Jose. And I don't like to have Lucia do too much. I mean, she's a kid. Anyways, my point is that we function as a unit, and a lot of time, the females in the home take charge. I appreciate my dad for doing what he's doing and everything, but he simply does what he is obliged to do. Nothing more and sometimes even less. My mother is always the one to instruct and tell me I should be independent and not rely on a man like she does. I've had to grow up quickly and be functional in a dysfunctional environment. I'm sure the lessons I've learned at home will be helpful in my college life. I just hope to have a chance. And she did have a chance and graduated a year ago and works for a nonprofit in Salem. That's Jordan for you.
That's awesome.
Go Jordan. Yes.
Thank you, Jaime. we will adjourn. Appreciate all the everything from staff, council, guests, and ultimately the youth and families that we're serving through our work. So thank you. We'll see you tomorrow afternoon at 1, if not a little bit early.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Take
Bye.
care.